Good morning. It is 6:08 on December 22nd, and this is Ron. Welcome to Story Time, and I'm coming to you, recording this on location at the Lovebirds Cafe in Pasadena on Colorado Boulevard. So today's selection is an article called Into the Storm. It's from the November issue of GQ magazine, and it's written by Tristram Corton. And it says the introduction here is, one terrible night last year, two giant ships sailed into a hurricane that defied all expectations and would soon cause the deadliest American maritime disaster in decades. The only hope for those aboard? A young Coast Guard helicopter squad racing into the tempest, determined to save whoever they could find. So this is going to last about a 15-minute episode, and I imagine this is going to take about at least 4 episodes to complete this article. The plane was cold and the engines were loud inside the cabin. Bed Cornea slipped in foam earplugs to drown out the noise. Tendrils of light were just starting to lace the morning clouds as the C-130 Hercules, gleaming white with the U.S. Coast Guard's telltale orange bands, neared the cockpit and tail, climbed above Air Station Clearwater into the sky above Florida, heading south, then east. The heavy-browned Minnesotan glanced around the cabin, where guys were settling in for the 3-hour flight to what had been one of the loneliest outposts of the Coast Guard, a glorified sandbar, otherwise known as Great Inagua Island, Bahamas, their home for the last couple of weeks of September 2015. Cornea, 36 and married 10 years, palmed his phone and looked at the last text from his wife. "Be safe," she wrote. Ha, no problem, he thought. 2 weeks of tropical boredom. As a member of a 4-man helicopter flight team, he always envied the rest of the crew on these deployments. The pilots would get to fly their beloved Jayhawks on patrol over the Caribbean. The flight mechanics tinkered with whatever it was they tinkered with. But a rescue swimmer like Cornea, he'd be lucky if he got his feet wet. He'd settle for hitting the weights, getting some running in. At night, he'd grill steaks and maybe bake cookies as consolation. A few seats over, Dave McCarthy, a 36-year-old helicopter pilot, pressed play on a country music mix, Kenny Chesney, Toby Keith, and leaned his head back. This would be his first deployment to Great Inagua. His co-pilot, 28-year-old Rick Post, also a lieutenant, sat nearby. He tended to like these postings. They were like 2-week camping trips that, despite the wildly different terrain, reminded him of growing up outdoors in Nebraska. Likewise, the 4th member of the Jayhawk crew, Joshua Andrews. A flight mechanic days away from his 32nd birthday with jug ears and a wide smile, Andrews knew there wasn't much to do with his downtime except go snorkeling and get in some fishing, which sounded pretty good to him. Below them, the Florida Straits opened wide. One big cerulean highway thick with the traffic of freighters, towering cruise ships, rusty fishing trawlers, smugglers of drugs and humans, all ferrying their goods back and forth, all expecting smooth, profitable journeys. It was late September, the tail end of the ominous June to November hurricane season, during which those who live and work in the tropics and subtropics exist in a state of magical thinking, lulled into a sense of safety by previous years' inactivity. But the waters of the world's oceans are warming, and the dangers are growing. The prime conditions for stronger and stronger storms are becoming more common. On this particular day, as the giant C-130 began its descent, and the clear waters of the Bahamas were around 86 degrees, about 2 degrees warmer than usual. It was a small variant that 10 days later would have a big impact. The plane banked hard over the landing strip, scaring off the wild donkeys that stray onto the tarmac. On the ground, the heat enveloped the men like a warm bath as soon as they stepped off the aircraft. As they marched towards the hooches, their 4-bunk dorms, they passed a newly constructed hangar and a plaque commemorating the old one, destroyed in 2008 by Hurricane Ike. It had taken 5 years to rebuild this little outpost, but the Coast Guard was determined. A tiny island of about 900 people, Great Inagua sits along the Windward Passage, the strait between Cuba and Haiti, a location that makes it the ideal spot from which to run anti-narcotic smuggling patrols. That it also puts the coasties on a well-paved route for hurricanes is a coincidence for which they prepared. The hangar's doors, 28 feet high and over a foot thick, were fashioned from cast concrete. The building could withstand hurricane winds of 180 miles per hour. On an island where nothing much seemed to happen, the Coast Guard nevertheless built a fortress with the expectation that someday something would. Monday, September 28, 2015, dawned cloudless in South Florida. The night before, forecasters watching the skies from a concrete bunker just outside Miami had seen something interesting: a low-pressure system 400 miles southwest of Bermuda. To the experts at the National Hurricane Center, there we go, it looked like the germ of something. Winds were blowing about 35 miles per hour, but the forecasters didn't seem concerned. Little change in strength is forecast during the next 48 hours, one of them wrote at 11 p.m. Maybe it would turn into a storm, but probably not much more. Major hurricanes don't usually originate in the mid-latitudes. They typically come from the trade winds that blow off the western coast of Africa into the Caribbean, where there is warm water to fuel big tempests. Even if the gathering winds became a storm, projections showed it's staying far from land. It looked to the forecasters like it had curved harmlessly to the north. Still, Captain Rich Lorenzen, commanding officer back at the Coast Guard's Air Station Clearwater, likes to say that when it comes to weather, as soon as a puff of air wafts off Africa's coast, he's watching. The formation, named Tropical Depression 11, was in his briefing when he came into the office on Monday. That same morning, along the Miami River, the 12-member crew of a freighter named Manouche was getting ready to cast off. The Manouche, 212 feet long with 2 cargo booms sprouting mid-deck, was tied up at Caribbean Shipping, a modest docking operation in a neighborhood of metal recycling shops and warehouses. The 35-year-old Bolivian-flagged vessel was captained by a Filipino named Ranelo Galera. The Manouche was operated by a tiny firm called Eva de Shipping. In some of the paperwork, the name was elided to the unfortunate Evade Shipping. The Manouche was the company's only vessel, and the corporate office was listed as the dock in Miami where the ship kept a slip. In other words, the company was the ship itself. Every month or so, the Manouche made a run from Miami to Haiti. The plan this particular Monday was to set off for Port de Paix with a cargo of construction materials, food, bicycles, car parts, refrigerators, and groceries. By late morning, 2 tugs had arrived to tow the Manouche down the black sheen of the Miami River out into Biscayne Bay. From there, the course was southeast to Haiti. Looking out from the deck, the crew had no reason to think they wouldn't arrive by Thursday just as scheduled. The skies were clear. The sun was out. It was a calm end-of-summer day. But up north, more than 500 miles out in the Atlantic, the winds of Tropical Depression 11 were increasing. By nightfall, they were blowing at 40 miles an hour, strong enough to earn the storm a name and an upgrade. Meteorologists were now watching Tropical Storm Joaquin. The Manouche was a minnow compared with El Faro, an American commercial freighter that stretched 790 feet, longer than 2.5 football fields. The thing was a floating city. It performed the same job as the Manouche, just more of it, ferrying goods between Jacksonville, Florida, and Puerto Rico. On Tuesday morning, at its slip at the Jacksonville Port Authority, the 33-member crew was securing the last of its 391 containers and 294 trailers and cars. They'd be underway by Tuesday night in order to reach San Juan by Friday, October 2nd. Captain Michael Davidson and his sailors were no doubt aware of the tropical storm that was brewing, but they could have been comforted by what forecasters were saying. Joaquin was going to track well north of where they were headed. Plus, a leviathan like El Faro could crash through a 45-mile-per-hour winds with ease if it came to that. But even as El Faro was leaving port, Joaquin was gaining strength. By Wednesday morning, it was a Category 1 hurricane and growing by the hour, it seemed. It became a Category 2 on Wednesday evening. Now the winds were blowing at 105 miles per hour. Once it became a hurricane, it became a major hurricane fast. Robbie Berg, a specialist at the National Hurricane Center, said. The prevailing pattern for storms like this is for them to head west, then curve north. But Joaquin had been defying all patterns so far. It was somehow moving south towards the Bahamas, toward the paths of El Faro and the Manouche and dozens of other vessels at sea. By Wednesday night, people on the islands near the storm's unruly path were warned to take shelter. Ships at sea were advised to immediately return to port. The National Hurricane Center issued a blunt warning to anybody in the Bahamas. Preparations to protect life and property should be rushed to completion. Hundreds of miles away, a sailor who knew El Faro well watched the concern grow on TV. From his home in the Maine, the ship's former second mate, Charles Baird, texted his friend, Captain Davidson, to alert him to Joaquin's growing menace. Davidson wrote back that he was aware of the situation and confident he could duck south and sail under the storm. It's impossible to know exactly what motivated Captain Davidson. Did his experience tell him the storm posed no threat? The forecast still predicted Joaquin would track north-northwest. Did he feel pressure to stick to his schedule? Time was fuel and salaries. Tote Maritime, the company that owned and operated El Faro, had said the captain made his own itinerary and route. Or was he just confident that 800-foot-long ships didn't sink? By early Thursday morning, October 1st, some members of the crew were starting to worry about the route. It looked to them like they were sailing into a monster. Danielle Randolph, a 34-year-old second mate, emailed her mother, Lori Bobbiott, at 4:39 a.m. Not sure if you've been following the weather at all, but there's a hurricane out here and we are heading straight into it, Randolph wrote. Outside, the winds were raging at 120 miles per hour, whipping 30-foot seas. Winds are super bad and seas are not great. Love to everyone. Randolph, a petite 5'3", 5'0", her mother would tease her, was as tough as iron. A graduate of Maine Maritime Academy, she dreamed of captaining her own ship one day. Now, her note left her mother unnerved. Never before had Randolph emailed during a storm. Her messages only came afterward, so that her mother wouldn't worry. And never, ever had she signed off, love to everyone. Typically, she'd end with her initial or something more casual like, say hi to everyone. With a mother's instinct, Bobbiott knew to be scared. And that's going to be the end of the first installment of this article. It's called Into the Storm. It's the November 2016 issue of GQ magazine. And let's see, give one more credit to the author, which is Tristan Corton. And the photography on this was done by Thomas Pryor. So, next episode of Storytime will be on Monday, and that is going to be, Monday the 26th, day after Christmas. And so I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas, and stay safe and warm, and take care, and we'll see you then.